I was very skeptical about The Witcher 3. I couldn't believe that CD Projekt Red actually created so many unique and enticing quests in such a relatively short development cycle. I thought that behind the veil of context, there must be a formula, some sort of recipe that the quest team used over and over at the studio to churn out as many quests as they could for this game. I was, for the most part, wrong. In this video, I am going to analyse and break down every single quest that I had completed in The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. It took me just over 84 hours to complete The Witcher 3, and in that time I had completed 112 quest lines, of which contained 658 individual quests. From those quests, I managed to be able to chunk 91.7% of them into categories. The remaining 8.3% were placed into a category labelled as unique, either because they just didn't fit any description of the other categories, or because they didn't repeat more than 5 times. One example of a unique quest would be throwing snowballs at Ciri, or maybe fixing some mirrors in a dungeon. The remaining categories are talk, travel, find, fight, and retrieve. From turning these quests into categories, I wanted to see if I could find an order in which most quest lines would play out. I wanted to see if you could always start by talking to someone, or you always finish by traveling somewhere or finding something. I just wanted to see if there was a method to the perceived madness that is The Witcher 3. I think if you are a fan of The Witcher 3, you'll be glad to know that you haven't been tricked or misguided. There is conclusively no average quest in this game. From the data that I collected from my time playing the game, I found that first off, no quest line went longer than 10 quests total, so what that meant is that I could take the most used quest category from each quest in a 10 quest line and form an average, or more so a most popular quest for the designers to design in that specific questline number. It is safe to say that there isn't a single quest that I have completed that comes close to matching the quests given to me from the spreadsheet, and I doubt that any quest in the game that I am yet to complete would share the same structure. According to the data in my spreadsheet, the average quest is 70% finding and 30% travelling, which doesn't match the average use of the categories even remotely closely, and doesn't match any questline structure that I have completed. However, I decided that to save myself from any outliers and to better represent the average category use as a whole rather than for each individual quest step, I worked out the average questline neglecting to take into account the most popular category. This gave a more well-rounded quest, but still didn't match the average questline percentage, and still didn't match a questline that I have completed, but I think could match a questline in the game, or at least I can't think of a reason for it to not have the potential to. From the secondarily most popular questline, the percentages worked out as so: 20% talk, 20% find, 30% travel, and 30% fight. There are some similarities between those percentages and the percentages of the categories as a whole, them being 18.4% talk, 24.8% travel, 13.3% fight, 29.8% find, and 5% retrieve, and 8.7% unique. And considering the latter two could never be 100% accurate in a sample size of 10 quests, considering that they are both represented below 10%, I think that there could be a reason to believe that this secondary quest type has some validity to it, being used as a potential formula. However, that is ignoring quite a large chunk of the game's detective mechanics, being the use of finding quests. So I'm going to end this data analysis portion of the video by reiterating my original statement. I do believe that there is no average quest in The Witcher 3. Now, what does that actually mean for The Witcher 3? Well, first off, it is one of the reasons why the game is renowned for being Undisputed Game of the Year 2015, and it is also why I believe it took so long for me to finish the game. And I'm not just talking about the 83 hours. I originally bought The Witcher 3 back in 2015, the year of its release, and it took me more than 4 years to complete the game, which includes 4 restarts, including one where I restarted from Skellig, which, if you didn't know, is about 60% of the way through this mammoth of a title. But anyway, this isn't the video to talk about why people think they need to restart video games when they come back to them. I'll save that for another video. But I do want to talk about why it took me so long to complete this game, how it relates back to the data, and why it's okay. The Witcher 3 is a game I wanted to play. The Witcher 3 isn't a game that I wanted to complete. Those are 2 very big distinctions between a video game like The Witcher 3 and, say, a game from the Halo series that I recently sat down and played through. Halo is a game where you play as a relatively emotionless Spartan with unknown motives, until the latter games anyway. You walk slowly through blank corridors and into the same copy-paste rooms all over again, fighting the same enemies over and over. In The Witcher 3, literally every quest is full of life, hardships, compassion, hate, all of it, and any quests can lead you anywhere. I'd now like to talk about 2 minor quests that made a big impact on me, and the first one even made a big impact on the game itself. The Witcher Contract, Ghost of the Past. This quest is 40% find, 40% travel, and 20% fight. Just before I get started, I would like to mention that for those that remember this questline, the reason why there is 0% talk is because at no point in the quest do you actively choose to talk to Letho, and there isn't a quest in this questline that forces you to talk to him. This questline, like most of the Witcher contracts, starts off by me picking up a notice on the notice board in a town in the middle of nowhere. The contract was to rid an old lady's previous noble home of monsters so that she could return there, and in return I would receive whatever fortune was left in the home and that hadn't been pillaged. However, when I got there I realised that there wasn't any monsters about, but instead a bunch of traps, and lots of them. I used my Witcher senses to navigate the minefield carefully until I eventually came across Letho, an old acquaintance from a previous game I assume. We got to talking and then all of a sudden a bunch of enemies appeared looking for Letho. We decided to jump down and fight, killing every last one of them. Letho asked for me to follow him, and so I did. We travelled back to the town that I got the quest from, and I thought, oh, that was clever design. The game brought me back to the place close to my quest giver, so it wouldn't take me out of my way to complete the quest line. But no, we weren't done yet. We travelled to the outskirts of the town, and Letho confronted a group of enemies that belonged to the same enemies that we had fought just before. I stayed undercover as per instruction, until a fight broke out and Letho fell to the ground, presumably dead. I decided to slaughter them all where they stood, instead of staying hidden, which, when Letho came to later on, I found out was a terrible mistake, as it was part of Letho's plan to be seen dead, so he could finally be a free man. To reconcile with him, I offered him a bed at Kaer Morhen, the Witcher school where Geralt was trained, which then made him appear during one of the endgame quest lines, where all the people that I helped previously in the main and secondary quests helped me fight one of the big bads of the story. Mind you though, this wasn't from a main or secondary quest. Letho was here because of a completely optional and very missable Witcher contract that I found on a random notice board in the middle of nowhere. This just shows how the developers wanted to make every single thing you do in the game important and mean something. Not because they wanted players to want to complete their game, but because they wanted them to play it and enjoy playing it for hours and hours and hours. Because what's the point in spending hundreds of millions of dollars on developing these storylines and quest lines if no one can be asked to play them? Here's another example of a quest. The name of the contract was called Shrieker, which I had obtained after meeting the Bloody Baron for the first time. Along the way to getting information about the Bloody Baron's not-so-missing wife and daughter, I came across a contract on the notice board which pointed me in the direction of a man outside his shack. By the way, if you go to this shack, you will find 2 people just completely passed out. Anyway, I spoke to him and he mentioned the monster which has been causing bother to local cattle and goats, also saying that it had killed a huntsman who was trying to take it down. The most interesting part of the description, however, is that he referred to the monster as a Shrieker. Later we find out that this wasn't his actual name, it was actually a cockatrice. But this misinformation, first of all, is genius in terms of world building and context, as localization and slangs for animals, plants, buildings and even medicine would have been incredibly common in this setting and time. and who would blame him for thinking that something that shrieks would be called a shrieker, especially since he never got a proper look at it. Anyway, after you take on this contract, you can either go straight to the site of the slaughter, or you can first speak to the son of the huntsman being the one that died to the hands of the shrieker. The son is a recent orphan, as his father was the sole parent of his household, so understandable, he was quite upset. I would like to mention though that I wasn't expecting the son to be so young, especially when the man at the beginning mentioned that the son was there during the fight. I assumed he would be a teenager or a young adult if he was there to help his father. If we were to deep dive into the story, we know that the huntsman is reckless in the first place, as charging headfirst into a fight with a monster he could not even properly identify and could slaughter cattle easily isn't the smartest move. So in that case, you could understand how a man as careless as that could bring his boy along for the fight, even though he is so young. However, we also know another piece of information, that the wife of the huntsman, the mother of the child, died years ago. What I'm getting at is this could be more than just an attempt to rid a beast that was harming the lives of farmers around the fort of the Bloody Baron. This could have actually been one last hurrah, a heroic moment that would end his life, but maybe save others as well, allowing him to return to being with his wife once more. As for the child would have been young enough to feasibly be the cause of his mother's death. His mother would have died giving birth. His father could have blamed him for her death, resented him even for surviving, when she didn't. Even if this wasn't the case, him being a constant reminder of her, whether it was his features or whatnot, would have been enough to drive him mad, enough to thrust him into the path of danger, to take them both to the other side. Anyway, after you calm down the child and get a bit of useless information from him, you move your way down to the site of the slaughter. Then you find out that the huntsman did indeed put up a fight, and a good one at that, harming the cockatrice and sending it back to its cave. One little side note as well about this finding portion of the quest is that I did enjoy where they mixed up the tracking mechanic by making it so the tracks disappeared when the cockatrice went through the water. This allowed for some great contextual based deduction. Once you see the tracks head straight into the water, you are left stranded when it comes to information. Your Witcher sensors no longer allow you to see any more tracks, so you have to actually make the leap of checking the other side of the water to see the tracks continue. I only bring this part up because so much The Witcher 3 is just following those red marks on the floor, so spicing things up a bit with purely contextually based thinking is really cool. Next we track the cockatrice down to the cave where it's been hiding out, however there is one final twist. You need a smoke bomb to get it out of hiding. Of course, with this being so early on in the story, I don't have any bombs or enough supplies to make any, but thankfully I remembered that there was a herbalist we had a little flirt with not too long ago back in White Orchard. I went back there, spent more money than what I was getting from the contract initially to craft the bomb, returned to the cave and had a big old fight in the rain. Finally, I returned with the trophy that I got from the cockatrice's head, to the man to receive my reward. There was one final decision to make, and that was to either allow the boy to take my reward or to have it myself. But like I said, I went quite a bit out of pocket for this contract, so you can be sure I took the money. This quest more highlights the other great strength of The Witcher 3, its writing. This quest also on paper works out like this: talk, find, unique, travel, fight, retrieve. Sure, compared to the last quest with Letho, it is more varied, and more varied than the average quest as a whole. Which is a good thing, but not why it makes this questline great. It's because of how well written it is. I briefly mentioned this at the start of the video, but it is true that the Witcher 3 developer, CD Projekt Red, had an entirely massive quest team which worked in tandem with the writing team that had the sole focus of creating and writing interesting quests. In the book Blood, Sweat and Pixels, a book which I highly recommend by the way, probably one of the more readable books on design and developer stories out there at the moment, describes the development of the quests in The Witcher 3 as well as CD Projekt Red's goal. With The Witcher 3, CD Projekt Red wanted a game that would take at least 100 hours to finish. To hit a number that absurd, The Witcher 3's designers needed to start as early as possible, sketching and writing as much as they could during pre-production before there was even a game to play. Everything would begin in the writer's room. The book then quotes one of the writers on the game, Jakub Samalak, sorry if I pronounced that wrong. We start with a general idea. Then we expand it and cut it into quests. then we work closely with quest designers to make sure that it all makes sense from their perspective. Having the categories for quests laid out from a design perspective is unfortunately essential in order to make design efficient enough to make it economically possible to produce a game this size. And there is nothing wrong with outlining core mechanics and using them in different ways to create effects. But there is no doubt that if CG Projekt Red stopped there, the game would be a shell in comparison to what it ended up being. Another great example of how they efficiently started work on designing a mass amount of quests in a team environment is how Mateus, and I'm sorry, I'm not even going to try to pronounce your last name, I do apologize, effectively used a workflow system to make sure that a quest was heading in the right direction, but sourcing the heavy lifting and busy work to one of the single writers down the chain. As head of the quest department, he would work with individuals on the team of writers and lay out basic themes for each quest. Again, in Blood, Sweat and Pixels, one example given is that Matthias would say this quest is a quest about famine. Then he would assign that to a quest designer who would then plot out exactly what was going to go on in the quest. In a massive team environment like this strategy allows for an overall cohesive theme to take strong foothold in the overall story, whilst maintaining that ever important uniqueness and freedom that every quest in this game has. And yes, even the one about the frying pan. Thank you so much for watching this more analytical video. I usually focus more on design principles, but I thought deep diving into a masterpiece like The Witcher 3 was too tantalizing to miss out on. If you didn't know, I'm also an indie dev and I'm currently working on getting ready to release a game with my studio called Block is a Stacking Game, which is a game about stacking blocks as fast as you can, and it will be available to back on Kickstarter February 28th. Thanks once more, and goodbye.